Okay.
That's me.
Why, Dalia Gordon? Why?
דליה ראית את דליה?
כן.
אותה לא ראית הרבה זמן.
כן.
לא שומעים אותה, דליה.
Shalom לכולם. I will start in Hebrew for a while and then I will speak in English until גשמה will join us. אז עד שגשמה תצטרף אלינו אני רוצה להגיד שלום לכל האנשים שנמצאים כאן. חלקם דמויות מוכרות לי, חלקם אני לא מכירה ונכיר עם הזמן. אני רוצה להגיד שיש לנו קבוצת וואטסאפ שאתם יכולים לתת לי את הטלפונים ולהירשם לקבוצה ואז תוכלו לראות באמת את כל הפרטים, מתי יש שיעור, מתי מתבטל שיעור, אם אנחנו מצרפים קבצים. אחרי ההקלטות אני שמה קישור שאפשר יהיה להיכנס ולראות את ההקלטה, כל הדברים האלה, וכמובן שבדף המורה באתר שלנו יש גם כן את כל הדברים.
To whom to send the telephone number?
אתה יכול בעברית כי אני תכף מדברת באנגלית. לשלוח את זה אליי. ואני פשוט אכתוב לי שאתה רוצה, תזכיר לי שאתה רוצה, ואני אצרף אותך לקבוצה. Hi everyone, Tashi Delek. My name is Dalit. Welcome to Monday course with Geshe Kelsang Wangmo on the text Precious Garland by Nāgārjuna. I have a few short announcements. We streamed live on our YouTube channel and all of the courses video will be there available for all of you. And please leave your camera on. It will be nicer for our teacher. Dharma Friend of Israel is a non-profit organization that runs all of its activities by volunteers. All our activities are offered freely and supported by participants, donation only. So our activities are totally dependent on your support, your dana. So I will put the link for the donation web, where is the donation on our website, and you can donate to our course. It's very important that if you have a question, and it's very, very helpful, so just about the topics in the course, in the class, please write it to me, to my email. I will put it in the chat. And I will pass it to Geshema and organize it that it will be easier for air. We have a WhatsApp group. This WhatsApp group, we publish everything. Like when we finish to record on the YouTube channel, so we put a link in the WhatsApp group. So you can join our WhatsApp group. We put there the material for the course if our teacher have changed or she want to announce us something. So there is the WhatsApp group. So I will put everything there. And Geshema, it's so nice to see you again. I'm so
nice
happy.
To see you too.
Look my face. So I will
Lovely
be
to
your
see
co-host.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I was a little late. I had some trouble with my internet, but now I'm all set.
Okay,
all right, shall we
you're
start?
Co-host now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so to start with just a few words of how we're going to go through this particular text, even before we set the motivation, or, well, say something mainly about the motivation. It would be so much nicer if you were right in front of me, because then I would be able to tell whether you're doing the motivation or not. And the thing is, it's just so beneficial. I'm not saying this to start some kind of weird discipline, but doing this motivation together, generating the motivation together, makes it so much more beneficial in the sense that we get much more out of this text. So some of you who may listen later on, if you have the time to go through these few minutes of meditating together, it's just so much better in the sense that our mind is fully prepared to receive these teachings, generating the mind of enlightenment. And as many of you know, we start off with a visualization of the Buddha. Now, in the past, I would go into more details on what the Buddha looks like, but I don't think I need to do that. It's just, the point is really to be inspired, having the sense that the Buddha is in front of us, which is not make-believe, because the Buddha's mind is anywhere. And so the Buddha can manifest anywhere. There's no limit in terms of space, for instance. So to visualize the Buddha, and I'll say a few words about that. And then, of course, visualize sentient beings all around us. That is so important, again, for our motivation to do what we're doing for the benefit of other sentient beings. And however fake that may feel, well, oh, there is the Buddha. However fake that may feel, but we still make an effort to generate bodhicitta, generating first a feeling of closeness. And I'll give a reason or two for why it makes sense to feel close towards sentient beings. For instance, based on our dependent arising, dependence on other sentient beings, and then focusing on great compassion, or focusing on the suffering of sentient beings, the limitations sentient beings have, and then wishing them to be free from these limitations and their causes. And that strength, or that becomes stronger than in the form of the altruistic attitude, followed by then bodhicitta. So these are really the kinds of mind that we generate together. And most important is to generate the mind of enlightenment. Okay, so for the motivation, it's just that. And we only recite one prayer, which is refuge and bodhicitta. Okay, and then as to the rest of it, well, I'll talk about it after we generated the motivation. So let's do it all together. We start as usual with a few moments of breathing meditation so that our mind is fully focused on the meditation or on generating the motivation. And then visualize in the space in front of you the embodiment of all enlightened qualities, such as boundless love, compassion, the wisdom, understanding all phenomena, in the form of the Buddha appearing before you. Showing us, inspiring us to reach the same state. Which we can only reach if we focus on the benefit of all sentient beings. And so let's visualize that we're surrounded by all sentient beings, seated all around us, wherever there's a space. And let's start by generating affectionate love, which is a type of affection, a feeling of closeness and concern for all sentient beings. Based on the fact that the nature of the mind of sentient beings does not differ from the mind of a Buddha. And that all their faults, their afflictions, their negativities are not in the nature of their mind. Get a sense that sentient beings are actually a part of us. But at this point, they experience endless sufferings, all sorts of unwanted experiences. Confusion, hatred, greed, and so forth. So let's generate great compassion, just the sincere aspiration for all sentient beings to be free from any type of dissatisfaction and its causes. And that further wishes for all sentient beings, wishes ourselves to be able to assist all sentient beings in overcoming their dissatisfaction and its causes. And that great compassion then grows stronger. The aspiration turns into the determination in the form of the altruistic attitude that is set on doing whatever is necessary to help sentient beings overcome their dissatisfaction and its causes. But since right now we can not even benefit ourselves, remove our afflictions ourselves, let's generate bodhicitta, a sincere aspiration to attain the fully awakened state of a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. and think that it's with this motivation that we study Nāgārjuna's Precious Garland. So let's first recite the prayer, refuge and bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, great. So okay. Can you make me a co-host, Dalit?
You are a co-host.
Oh yeah, there. Okay, yeah. Here I am. Great. All right. Now the next thing I would like to do over the course of the next month, well, however long it takes us to finish this text. Maybe, well, no, first I start off with this. Okay, so I'd like to go through the Lamrim just every time before we start talking about the text, just to mention some of the aspects of the Lamrim, to connect them also with what we're studying, connect them with Precious Garland. If you have the interest, if you have the time to, well, meditate on the Lamrim daily, every day, take one of the subjects. If it suits you the way we go through it, well, then choose one of the subjects. And in that way, we'll be able to go through the entire text. Unfortunately, last time we didn't finish it, but since they're new people probably, so I'm starting again from the beginning. But I'm pretty sure this time we'll finish because this text will take a while to get through. And so, yeah, to meditate on these different topics step by step. And just to remind you, it's not hard to understand, but to remind you of the different outlines, the different headings and their outlines, which you can also find, of course, in the Lamrim, in the Great Lamrim, in the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa, and other texts on the Lamrim. And usually it starts off with very good news, basically, leaving out reliance on the spiritual teacher. In this context, I think it's good to start with remembering our precious human rebirth, our precious human life. The outlines here are from Thupten Chodron, from Venerable Thupten Chodron. Anyway, so if you read through them, they're pretty straightforward, but it's basically about appreciating or being grateful for what we have. So just to remember, we have incredible opportunities in this particular life at this point in time, opportunities which we don't know we'll ever have again. This does not just include the fact we're born human. So from a Buddhist point of view, there are different states of existence, different birth as animals and so forth possible, but we've basically attained the best kind of rebirth, best kind of state in which it's possible to transform our mind, to enhance our mind, to find more happiness, more inner peace, more satisfaction, and to appreciate that and all the opportunities and the freedoms that it has. So, well, first of all, in here, just a few mentioned, in particular with regard to having the chance for studying and practicing the Dharma. So we're not reborn, we're reborn as animals, and we're not reborn in life forms that experience continual pain and fear, or life forms that experience continual frustration and clinging, as I mentioned here. We're not born as animals, we're not born as celestial beings. Even as celestial beings, that would be a disadvantage. So in this case, therefore, in this sense, therefore, yeah, well, we're not born in what's called the lower realms, called kind of have hellish experiences. We're not born as preta beings here, described as having continual frustration and clinging. Animals I mentioned, celestial beings. So as human beings with a healthy amount of well-being and a healthy amount of suffering, with suffering, being able to use suffering in a positive way. And likewise, as human beings, again, we're not born in states, into countries, for instance, where it's illegal to practice the Dharma, or where the Dharma is not available at all, where we have no access to these methods that are described in the Buddhist teachings on transforming the mind. We are mentally of sound body, of sound mind, and we have an interest. We don't hold really strong views, but instead we have an openness and an interest in applying these practices, and in that way finding more satisfaction, finding more inner peace. Okay, all right. So this is something to reflect on. I don't want to say too much about it. You can sit down and go through these different points. And of course, there's so much more to it. So much more to it in the sense of having certain financial comforts, financial possibilities, having the time, being able to make the time to sit down and meditate and so forth. So I'm sure we find more specific kind of freedoms we have that give us the opportunity to practice the Dharma. Anyway, enough on this. So I think that should suffice. I'd like to go into the text right away. And one thing I want to start with, I mean, explaining why I stopped teaching the fundamental wisdom. The two reasons, basically. Of course, it's such an important text, and I'd love to go back to it. But first of all, in this year, I have some work that's been going on for a long time, but this year I have to finish this particular, well, one book I'm translating has been given to me by the private office, and I really have to finish it. So it takes too much time to prepare the material on the fundamental wisdom. There's, of course, Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on that text, which is amazing. However, the translation is a little difficult. Sometimes the vocabulary is unusual, it's difficult, and the explanations can be, a little hard to follow. And so without preparing some material, I don't think I could go through it in such a way that I just summarize the most important bits, because, I mean, to study it in all its details would take a really long time. The second reason is that I've also got some feedback that people felt just emptiness, it was just too intense. To only talk about emptiness was too abstract, and the method aspect was missing for them. So, well, anyway, after, of course, the attacks in October, I changed the topic to as you know, to a Lojong text, which seemed more appropriate given the circumstances, particularly in Israel. But then I felt, after we went through the entire text, that now was the time to choose a text, again, by Nāgārjuna, but that included everything. Emptiness, of course, a very important topic, but also a lot of other aspects, a lot of other teachings on, well, liberation, enlightenment, how to bring it about, how to practice, basically. So as Samdang Rinpoche puts it in one of his teachings on this particular text, it just teaches us how to practice the Dharma with all the most important explanations given in this text. And so being one of the source texts for all the other great commentaries, for instance, Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, the different Lamrim texts. So this particular text, the Precious Garland, is the basis for all these other texts. And I received a lot of teachings on this text as well, by, of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, by His Eminence Samdo Rinpoche, by an amazing Geshe who's one of my personal teachers from Drepung Loseling, one of the main kind of philosophy teachers there. So I'm also following the commentary by Gyaltsab, as well as the commentary by, what's his name? I have to look it up. Geshe, wait, what? Forget this. Oh, Kensor. Wait. Sorry. Kensor Champa Tekcho. Yeah, sorry, I forgot his name. Kensor Champa Tekcho, in his commentary on this text called "Practical Ethics, Profound Emptiness." Practical Ethics, Profound Emptiness. I'm just looking for it here. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Can't see it clearly right now. But so all these commentaries, I'm basing all my explanations. So really, it's just a summary of these different commentaries. And hopefully I can add a little bit to it. But yeah, basically, it's like following them. There are these amazing teachings available on this particular text. So I hope I'll be able to share them with you. Now, as I did last time, and this is so much easier because the subject matter is not that difficult. What I do is I prepare some material for every class, because to just talk all the time, to just be speaking to you the whole time without giving you some kind of material will be difficult. Well, I started off with just giving you an explanation on Nāgārjuna, who's the author, so you can connect with the author. Of course, we've already did that with the fundamental wisdom. I also started talking about him. However, this being a new text, so therefore, I need to start from, I need to start it. Sorry, I just switched on my phone. This being a new text, therefore, being new text and a new audience possibly participating. So I decided to do it once again, and talk a little bit about Nāgārjuna, which is so important because being the author and being himself an enlightened, well, either a bodhisattva or a highly realized bodhisattva or even a Buddha, therefore making this connection is especially meaningful. Connecting to him, feeling inspired by who he is, feeling a sense of gratitude makes it so much easier to understand the text. And I'll say a little bit more about it in a moment. So I gave like a long explanation of who he was, what he has done, however much I could find on this. And then you'll see I actually start with the text. And something that is new is that I added the Tibetan, because some of you may know Tibetan. Okay, so this is a lot about Nāgārjuna. And then here the text starts, and I add the Tibetan in writing, because some of you may be able to read Tibetan. I'm not going to go through the Tibetan, but as you look at the text, you could compare it for those of you who can read Tibetan, and for the rest of you, well, just ignore it. If there's a general sense, oh, this is so confusing to have the Tibetan in there, of course, I can always delete it and next time not give you the Tibetan. But yeah, it's for me also helpful to look at it and be able to explain you some of the words, because a lot of Buddhist study is first of all studying the jargon, the Tibetan, well, as a friend of mine would call Buddhist hybrid English. Some of these really weird terms that are used specifically in the Buddhist context, but that we've borrowed from the English language and actually have a quite different meaning in a different context. And sometimes we read through them again and again, and we have a sense we understand them, but it may be helpful to explain them the way they're defined, for instance, in the Tibetan texts. So just to point it out again, what does it exactly mean? So I won't do this with every term, but some unusual terms. Remember, maybe before when I taught the 7-point mind training, we came across the word self, and we found there are at least 3 meanings of self in different contexts. Now, this is one of the more common kind of terms that you most probably more familiar with. But anyway, I'll make a point and look for some words that maybe are easily misunderstood. So there's that. I want to do that definitely. And I also give you some charts and graphics. For the topic today, I didn't find any graphics. There was nothing I could come up with. And anyway, I had only 2 days really. I just finished a course and I was very busy teaching the course. I couldn't do anything besides that. So that was what I could get together in this short time. And the material I'm making available to you. So these are really my notes, basically. And for instance, here, this is just the meaning of the title, and then you have an explanation that follows, and then again, a verse. And in this way, I'm adding what His Holiness said during his teachings on this text, His Eminence Samdon Rinpoche, my teacher, Geshe Nobu, and other great masters, so Geshe, of course, as well, and give you the fullest sense of the text possible. All right, the fullest possible sense of this text. All right, let's try this. So again, about Nāgārjuna. I mean, that seems, initially hearing about this person, it's so difficult to get a full sense of who he was, because although there's so many biographies, many of them are hagiographies, so a lot of it is not as realistic as we may hope, or we don't know how much we can actually take literally and how much is just, well, part of the hagiography. That means kind of talking about kind of things that don't seem to make sense to us, like talking about him flying here and flying there and so forth. I mean, like literally flying, as just an example. Now, this is not what is mentioned in the biographies I read. But anyway, so some kind of aspects that seem to just exaggerate the qualities of a particular being. So I try to not do that, find aspects we can more connect to. But again, when we study Buddhism, when we hear the description or when we hear the instructions, studying, reflecting on and meditating on Buddhism, studying, reflecting and meditating on Buddhism. Well, meditation, I guess to some point it's clear what's meant with that, although of course it requires more explanation, but oftentimes study and reflection are used together. So in preparation for our meditation, we need to study and reflect. This is true in Tibetan as well. So Tösam Gum means all three: study, reflection, and meditation. And sometimes you talk about just Tösam Cheva. So the study we did, for instance, is usually described as Tösam Cheva, studying and reflecting, where reflection is really the debate we did. And of course, not just the debate, but the constant reflection on the meaning of what we studied. But unfortunately, we have a sense, and it's totally understandable, the way we study in the West, that this is just an academic kind of study. It's just academic, just the way we study geography in school, the way we study math in school, the way we study any topic in school. So you just listen to what the teacher says. You don't want to hear too much what you've heard already. So just get new information, as much new stuff, new information as possible, and try to remember. That's the kind of sense of what we have of the study of Buddhism, which of course is far from it. First of all, what was very important is to generate a certain emotional state, a conducive mind. So conducive emotions for our study. So not just a sense of curiosity and openness, what is to come, but it needs to be much more than that, because otherwise there's no way we can ever fully understand Buddhist philosophy, especially when it comes to emptiness and so forth. So we start, for instance, and we've already done that, by generating bodhicitta, a mind that is deeply affected by love and compassion. And maybe the first time we do it, we may not really feel it, but, well, it's like fake it until you make it. We try to the best of our ability every time, again and again, to generate the sincere sense of compassion and love for all sentient beings. So to the best of our ability, and we can all do that. I mean, even beginners who've never done this can do this quite effectively. And that prepares the mind in a very special way. It makes it very conducive because it creates what is called one of the wings of a bird. So the method aspect, in order to then understand the wisdom aspect. So a bird can only fly when it has both wings. So method is love and compassion, and wisdom is understanding of emptiness, understanding of subtle impermanence, and certain kind of concepts that we're usually not that familiar with, or we have a rough sense of, we have a rough understanding of, but deep within our mind, from a more emotional level, is not affected by them, in that we don't act as if we understand subtle impermanence. We don't act as if we understand that the self doesn't exist separate from mind and body and so forth. We act in a way that seems to support wrong views when it comes to impermanence, etc. So now a bird needs both wings. First of all, if we start to study about wisdom aspect, about selflessness, about emptiness, about impermanence, well, without having our mind at least affected to a certain degree by way of meditating first on bodhicitta, etc. So without having our mind being affected by the method, it's like a bird can't even take off. And even if you were to take off, you're going to crash, such that you fall into extremes. There's nothing there. As the word emptiness in the Western context seems to suggest, everything is empty, is meaningless. So we absolutely need this aspect of love and compassion. So we start up with that, therefore, love and compassion, before we start studying this. And then we go into the different topics. But something else that's also important, and this is where the fact comes into play, that Buddhism is not like other religions. And I'm hesitant to even call it a religion. I think it's much more a science of the mind, a kind of psychology, a type of psychology that helps us to understand our mind, but even more importantly, to transform it in such a way that we don't continue to so unnecessarily suffer. Suffering from fear, from loneliness, from depression, and so forth. Especially at this day and age, these are some of our main problems. So therefore, in order to avoid some of these problems, we learn to generate positive states of mind, or psychologically helpful states of mind, based on which, well, we get a better understanding of other aspects of Buddhism, as I already described, parts of the wisdom aspect, but that gives us, that open our mind in a way in which our mind is usually not open. And when I finished the material today, it was just an hour before class started that I finished it. I had a few minutes time to also go a little bit into the modern psychological understanding of some of the states of mind I'm going to talk about now. For next time, I hope I have more time to do it. I only had a few minutes. What I'm talking about is a feeling of inspiration, being inspired, of a feeling of gratitude, and going as far as having a sense of devotion. These states of mind, on top of love and compassion, here directed at someone like Nāgārjuna, who's the author of this text, are so conducive for our mind. And there's been scientific research on that by, for instance, Harvard University, or there are articles on this on research on websites such as Psychology Today. So these are reliable sources. First of all, being inspired, feeling inspired. What does it do with us? So, like I said, I didn't really have time to prepare anything, so I'm just quickly going to look at my notes that I basically copy-pasted. Well, first of all, feeling inspired by someone like Nāgārjuna, what he's done, for instance. It provides us with and this is here, I'm just quoting this modern research. Oops. what happened? Okay, just quoting this modern research. So saying that, first of all, it gives us a more positive outlook. Makes sense at this day and age with so many problems. More positive outlook. Everyone needs that, basically. But also a greater sense of meaning in the world. And it opens our mind to a greater range of possibilities of what we can do. It doesn't erase our problems, but it can reduce the mental hold they have over us. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So when we're inspired, we feel a strong sense of purpose and direction, which can lead to new ideas and a pursuit of a personal goal. It helps us to solve problems more effectively and to just open our mind in a very profound way. It's considered a positive emotion and very important for our motivation and for awe, being in awe of something that is so beyond the ordinary. All right. So it awakens to us new possibilities by allowing us to transcend our ordinary experiences and limitations. Anyway, it's beautiful the way it describes all this. So it transforms the way we perceive our own capabilities. And history is treated as something supernatural or divine, which doesn't help really the situation. People are not that into that. But as recent research shows, and this is from Harvard itself, inspiration can be activated, captured, and manipulated, and it has a major effect on important life outcomes. Okay, anyway, so this was just a little bit I could scrap together, get together, but it just shows us that it's such an important state of mind. So to allow ourselves to be, where did my text go here? Allow ourselves to be inspired by Nāgārjuna and also having a sense of gratitude. Again, one of these emotions, and there wasn't enough time to go into that. And again, gratitude gives us a better sense of connection with other people, a sense of willpower, it generates more willpower, and so forth. So there's so many positive aspects of these two minds. And then also devotion. I haven't really gone into that, but what is devotion? I'm here borrowing a word in the English language that doesn't really describe devotion in the Buddhist sense, because devotion here is more a sense of deep happiness, of deep joy, kind of faith, devotion, seeing a person who's so amazing, who's done so much, and based on the understanding that we can do the same, or at least the belief that we can do the same, feeling a sense of appreciation, and again, feeling inspired. So wanting to be just like them. That's what devotion here means. So it's not some kind of senseless bowing and I don't know, whatever we often associate with that, kind of giving up our own kind of free will, for instance. Not at all. It's using our own free will in a very meaningful way. Okay, so having said all this, let's allow ourselves to be inspired by this being. And I hope I can kind of contribute to that by giving you the life story, or to say a little bit about Nāgārjuna. All right, so I'll go back to sharing the screen. Here we go. Okay. Can you see this? Okay, is it too small? Oh no, this is too. How can I make everyone? Okay, no, this is too. Is this big enough?
It's okay.
Yeah, can you read it? Good. Okay, so Nāgārjuna is widely considered to be one of the most important Buddhist philosophers, if not the most important philosopher, and is often referred to as the second Buddha. Well, unfortunately, there's so many different biographies, very difficult to choose. So Indian biographies, Tibetan biography, and biographies and Chinese biographies, and the emphasis here on the plural biographies. So in the Buddhist text, there is a great emphasis on the things Nāgārjuna accomplished. And one word that pops up all the time is he was a pioneer, a trailblazer, someone who introduced something such as, well, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras and so forth, and in that way was so instrumental to preserving the Buddha Dharma. Anyway, we'll go into this. So when you study Buddhist philosophy, it's very much a part of this, and I'll briefly go into this. Anyway, so Nāgārjuna was born at a time when the teachings of the universal vehicle, I refrained from using the word Mahayana, so the universal vehicle or the Sanskrit tradition were, with a few exceptions, no longer available in the human realm, and he's perhaps best known for reintroducing these teachings. So at some point they were not there. Okay, anyway, so without needing to say more about this, so when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, okay, when the Buddha taught for 84, well, not exactly 84 years, but almost 50 years, around 50 years, when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, he gave teachings on the universal vehicle, he did, to selected disciples. Okay, many of whom were bodhisattvas of the celestial realm. All right, first difficulty, celestial realm. Difficult to believe that there are different realms, but I guess there's so much we can't see directly, and we're just slowly learning about it in terms of modern science. And I'm pretty sure at some point science will come to a point when they can even establish the existence of other forms of life. And I'm not talking about bacteria and viruses, which they have already established. But anyway, for the time being, there are beings of celestial realms. And here, these bodhisattvas are not on these ordinary kind of worldly celestial realms, but as part of the pure realms. So many of the bodhisattvas who were disciples of the Buddha were part of these realms. And His Holiness the 40th Dalai Lama has remarked several times in reference to Avalokiteshvara's extensive answer to Shariputra's question in the Heart Sutra. So we're all aware in the Heart Sutra, Shariputra asks the question and Avalokiteshvara gives a really long answer. That Avalokiteshvara was a celestial being and therefore invisible to ordinary humans. Oh, there's already the first typo. To ordinary humans. Or to an ordinary human. So it must have seemed to ordinary humans who were present when the Heart Sutra was taught that Shariputra was talking to himself. This is slightly like, well, first of all, we are told they were not ordinary beings, ordinary humans who were there, unless they were uninvited and they just happened to walk past and listen to what the Buddha said, or listen to what was going on. And His Holiness, as I said, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama has on a few occasions said, well, they heard only Shariputra, they couldn't see Avalokiteshvara. Anyway, shortly after the passing of the Buddha, so we've heard this part, there's so many of the main disciples, so Avalokiteshvara makes sense, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who's considered to be a celestial being, at least at the time of the Buddha. Shortly after the passing of the Buddha, or the passing away of the Buddha, the first council was held. Okay, so the teachings of the Buddha were not widely given, and many of the bodhisattvas were of the celestial realm. So shortly after the passing of the Buddha, the first council was held, at which about 500 arhats gathered to collect the Buddha's teachings. It was presided over by Mahakashyapa, one of the Buddha's senior disciples, in a cave near Rajgriha, with the support of King Ajatashatru. Its purpose was to preserve the Buddha's sutras and the monastic disciplines, or rules, the Vinaya. Here's just some information. Sutras were recited by Nanda and the Vinaya by Upali, but these were mainly the teachings of the fundamental vehicle. So even when the Buddha was around, he taught to mainly bodhisattvas or mainly beings of the celestial realms, or many of the beings of the celestial realms, of course also to ordinary human beings, definitely also to ordinary human beings, but in a more secret way. Okay. Now, the most important teachings of the universal vehicle were, of course, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which are traditionally said to have disappeared from the human realm after the Buddha's death and were returned 400 years later by Nāgārjuna. So basically, as the Buddha taught, gave so many different teachings, but the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, for instance, only to a select group of people, not that many, more in secret, so not openly. And so after the Buddha's passing away, I mean, okay, the Buddha's teachings were written down after just in the same year, or I believe it was the summer retreat session after the Buddha's passing away, that the 500 arhats, or 500 just means a large number of arhats, came together for these teachings to be recorded, to be written down. But it was the fundamental vehicle that was written down. And why did the Buddha teach them more in secret? Well, because people would have been overwhelmed. I mean, thinking that at that time, the teachings that in India were prevalent were teachings on moksha, yes, on liberation, on overcoming suffering and its causes, but this incredible emphasis on love and compassion for all sentient beings. So great compassion here, not just being the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes, but to personally assist sentient beings, the wish to personally contribute to that, I guess was overwhelming for most practitioners at the time, because it didn't fit the usual kind of teachings on just liberation. They were also given in the non-Buddhist schools. And it makes sense that there were only a few people who were ready to receive these teachings. Now, something that I've mentioned many times before, I've criticized this. Now, I'm not even saying that there's any of you who has a problem with that, or who would actually make this claim that many modern academics make, that the Buddha didn't teach the Mahayana teachings, didn't teach the universal vehicle, that the Buddha didn't teach the universal vehicle. There's this common assumption. And I think that's just plainly wrong, and it's a wrong assumption, which deprives some people from even following the teachings of the universal vehicle, which are so precious. So something I always mention, so this is for the first time that I wrote it down. I don't even know whether it's that helpful, but I thought to write it down because I like this. This reasoning that I've came across by Ludwig Wittgenstein. I mentioned him many times. So tell me, now this is something that Ludwig Wittgenstein, I think he was Austrian, 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once asked one of his students, why do people always say that it is natural to assume that the sun moves around the earth rather than that the earth moves around the sun? His student replied, well, because it just looks like the sun goes around the earth. So Wittgenstein replied, well, what would it look like if it looked like the earth went around the sun? It would look the same, right? Does that make sense? It would look exactly the same. So what would it look like if it looked like the earth went around the sun, which is is the case? So likewise, here I applied it to Nāgārjuna. Tell me, the great Nalanda philosopher Nāgārjuna. So I just changed the wording a little bit. The great Nalanda philosopher Nāgārjuna once asked one of his disciples, why do some people say that it is natural to assume that the universal vehicle was not taught by the Buddha? His disciple replied, well, because it just looks like the universal vehicle was not taught by the Buddha, since these teachings did not become widely known until many years after the Buddha had passed away. Nāgārjuna replied, well, what would it look like if it looked like the Buddha gave the universal vehicle teachings only to a select few disciples in secret, and they only became part of the mainstream Buddhist teachings many years after the Buddha's death, when the minds of many more people were ready to receive these profound and extensive teachings, right? So just because that seems to be the most obvious answer, it's not necessarily, even if it seems obvious, but it's not necessarily the right answers, just as with the sun and the moon, the sun and the earth. Anyway, not that important, but I never spelled it out that way, and I thought to just do that. Okay. Anyway, returning to this, so the teachings of the universal vehicle were pretty much gone. So now, who was Nāgārjuna? He returned these teachings, and that's why he was so important. Well, one reason. Nāgārjuna was born into a Brahmin family, according to many sutras, about 400 years after the Buddha's death. According to modern academics, they place him usually in the 1st or 2nd century of this common era. Hard to really say which one it is. Anyway, he was born in Vidarbha, which is a kingdom in present-day Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. His birth and his important contribution to the Buddha Dharma were predicted by the Buddha. So even the Buddha himself said in the Descent into Lanka Sutra, in the Great Cloud Sutra, and another sutra called the Great Drum Sutra. So I didn't have time to look up these different quotes. Maybe I'll add them later on. Very specifically, there's going to be this man 400 years after my passing away will be born in this place. He'll be called Naga and so forth. So all these predictions were given that are very, very fascinating how precise they were in terms of what actually then happened. Anyway, when he was born, after Nāgārjuna had been born, a fortune teller, and this is typical for the time in India, a fortune teller was called, or an astrologer, and he predicted that Nāgārjuna would live only 7 days. But if his parents made offerings to 100 monks, he could live to be 7 years old. So only 7. That was the kind of description at the time, or was the kind of prediction for that time. And so his parents feared for his life. And so they sent Nāgārjuna at the age of 7 to the monastic university of Nalanda in northern India. The story, there are different versions of this story. Some say that he just sent them off and he just happened to come to Nalanda. In other versions, they sent him there. Anyway, so who did he meet there? The Buddhist master Saraha, this great Buddhist master called Saraha. And he told him that if he became a monk and recited the Amitayus mantra for a long life, he would live a long life. So Nāgārjuna did so and entered the monastery, receiving the name Srimanta. Srimanta. So that was his name at the beginning. So when he entered this amazing university, and what people did at that time when they entered the monastic university, entered Nalanda, they engaged in what I mentioned earlier in the beginning, study and reflection. So he did that, studied Sutra and Tantra with Ratnamati, one of his teachers, with Saraha, especially the Guya Samaja Tantra. So yeah, there were still some, I mean, this is definitely part of the universal vehicle, but there were only fragments. The universal vehicle, especially in the form of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, was not widely taught and known. Then the story also goes that he learned alchemy from I hope I pronounced this right, alchemy from a Brahmin and gained the ability to transform iron into gold. With this ability, he was able to feed the Nalanda monks during a famine. Again, in the more extensive explanation, there's a lot more to it. That it just showed his ability. Not everyone can learn this. And it was not that easy to do so. And he was able to basically keep this monastic institution alive, which is so important, because if it had disappeared, we wouldn't have this form of Buddhism nowadays. So again, the sense of appreciation and gratitude is very much directed at the fact, or comes about due to the fact that everything Nāgārjuna did, hadn't he done so, it's highly likely we didn't have these amazing teachings available nowadays. So really important to understand how important he was, how essential his actions were. Eventually, Nāgārjuna, of course, and here fast forward, became very learned, and he became so learned and respected that he was appointed as the abbot of Nalanda. And also very important, I guess, just this short sentence, he expelled 8,000 monks. I don't know whether there's 8,000, just many, many, many monks who did not properly observe the Vinaya monastic rules of discipline. So the monastic rules of discipline saying that although he was definitely so important to the universal vehicle, but the fundamental vehicle is the foundation. And so to keep the monastic rules of discipline is a foundation. So he wasn't just someone who was interested in only the teachings on the universal vehicle, but very much on the fundamental vehicle as well. And he also defeated 500 non-Buddhists in debate. So I guess it just showed how well learned he was, his skills in terms of, especially then later on, teaching the different types of reasonings that establish, in particular, emptiness. So very important to have someone who's so fully qualified, who was able to defeat in debate these 500 non-Buddhists. So defeat is such a strong word. It doesn't mean like, oh, these 500. It was like it's like this language of like warlike language. But of course, it was not considered that way at all. I mean, the 500 non-Buddhists, possibly they being defeated, maybe they became Buddhists. I don't know. There was this kind of rule: if you defeated, it would go both ways. If a Buddhist was defeated by a non-Buddhist, then this teacher, who represented a certain group of disciples, and the disciples had to convert to this particular non-Buddhist belief, and likewise the other way around. Now, I don't know whether that was the case here. There was a time when that was done that way, but I don't know what happened here. But it's just showing that he had that expertise, basically, or that ability to reason very effectively. Then there's the whole story about the Nagas. Now, with the Nagas, again, that sounds, yeah, I've heard kind of interpretations of like that being a particular place in India, like maybe Nagaland, or it's literally that there are these serpent beings that only Nāgārjuna and some other advanced beings could see. I really don't know. I'm just going to read to you what is usually in the biography. So, two youth who were emanations of the sons of a Naga king came to Nalanda, and they had the natural fragrance of sandalwood. There's apparently something about their smell. So Nāgārjuna asked how this could be, and they confessed, so they told him who they were. And then Nāgārjuna asked them for some sandalwood incense for a statue of Tara, and for the Nagas' help in building temples. So anyway, so this is how the connection came to be, about the Nagas and Nāgārjuna. So the youth then returned to the Naga kingdom and asked their father, who said he could only help if Nāgārjuna came to that kingdom to teach them. So Nāgārjuna actually went there, made offerings, and taught the Nagas. Now, whether it's a particular special place in India or like there were just special beings in a different realm, I don't know. But the point is that they were special, definitely, in terms of, well, the building material, at least they had, or the building skills. And they, on the other hand, really wanted Nāgārjuna to come and teach. But most important here is that Nāgārjuna knew that the Nagas had the 100,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So the most extensive Perfection of Wisdom Sutra that has been written down. And this is where it becomes so important, that the main teachings of the Buddha on the universal vehicle were the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So they contain the most important teachings. And of these, this particular one of 100,000 verses, that was with the Nagas. So he requested a copy. So where did I get it? Well, when the Buddha had taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Naga had taken a version of it back to their kingdom for safekeeping. So that's why they ended up having this particular text. And some say even more teachings, actually more, but the 100,000 is specifically, so the 100,000 is specifically mentioned there. Of course, shorter ones of 25,000 verses, 8,000 verses, and so forth. Nāgārjuna brought back this 100,000 verse version, this most extensive Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, although it said that the Nagas kept the last 2 chapters to ensure that he would return and continue to teach them. And later, the last 2 chapters were filled in with the last 2 chapters of the 8,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which is why the last 2 chapters of these 2 texts are the same. Okay, anyway, that's just in case you wonder. And Nāgārjuna also brought back Naga clay and built many temples and stupas with it. So, okay. And now comes to why was he called Nāgārjuna? Why is he called this? Well, once when Nāgārjuna was teaching the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, 6 Nagas came and formed an umbrella over his head to protect him from the sun. So we see this picture of like these snakes forming like almost like a halo, or well, as we hear here, like as we hear here, an umbrella, like an umbrella-like structure or parasol to protect him from the sun. To protect him from the sun. This is why the iconographic representation of Nāgārjuna has the 6 Nagas over his head. So these snake-like beings. From this event, he got the name Naga. And from the fact that his skill in teaching Dharma was straight to the point, like the arrows of the famous archer Arjuna. So the name of the hero in the Hindu classic, the Bhagavad Gita, he was given the name Arjuna. So he became known as Nāgārjuna. All right, so the one who's protected by the Nagas and whose skill in teaching was so straight to the point, like the arrows of the famous archer Arjuna. Okay, that explains why he was called Gumbulutro in Tibetan, Ludrup. Ludrup in Tibetan actually means the one, Ludrup, accomplished the Nagas, the protector who accomplished the Nagas. So it has a slightly different meaning in Tibetan. Gumbo means protector. Sometimes he's called Belgun. Belgun means glorious protector. And then Lu means Naga, and Drup means kind of to practice or accomplish. Okay, so that's the Tibetan word. But here, of course, we follow the Sanskrit or the Sanskrit word Nāgārjuna. Nāgārjuna is then later said to have traveled to the northern island to teach. So northern continent, northern island, like a totally different continent, as in like not visible, or a northern continent, like part of this world. Again, it is to be seen. But anyway, he traveled somewhere north. On the way, he met some children playing in the street. He prophesied that one of them, named Jetaka, would become a king. So when Nāgārjuna returned from the northern island, the boy had indeed grown up to become the king of a large kingdom in southern India. So Nāgārjuna stayed with him for 3 years, teaching him, and then spent his last years elsewhere in this kingdom, on Sri Parvata, the holy mountain overlooking present-day Nāgārjuna Konda. So this is important here in the context. First of all, it tells us where Nāgārjuna spent the last years of his life. He spent the last years of his life in a place that is now called Nāgārjuna Konda. So he spent this time in retreat then. But before that, he met this little boy he prophesied to become a king, which was in fact the case. He did become a king in southern India, and Nāgārjuna wrote the Precious Garland for this king. It was the same king to whom Nāgārjuna wrote a letter to a friend, namely King Udayabhadra, or Deju somewhere in Tibetan. So King Udayabhadra was the king to whom Nāgārjuna taught the Precious Garland. All right, so this is basically a bit of a sense of what he did. Now, if you visualize, of course, India 2,000 years ago, 2,200 years ago. So to get a better sense, it was such an amazing country when it came to spirituality. It had a great climate. It was not as hot as it's now, I suppose. Not as polluted as it's now, definitely not. And there was a real openness to the Dharma, and it was therefore very conducive in terms of, the whole background of this country of teaching the Dharma, of teaching the Buddha Dharma. But of course, it was not easy what the Buddha taught, especially when it came to the Mahayana, and the Buddha taught a lot of it in secret, which accounted for the fact that later on it basically disappeared. And Nāgārjuna came along as this special being, as this amazing, bright boy, basically, who had life obstacles, but nevertheless was able to overcome them, excel in his studies, excel in his understanding, and so forth, and then basically work towards bringing back these teachings of the universal vehicle, the teachings on enlightenment, on love, compassion, and so forth. So very important. But of course, also helping the Nagas teachings, giving a lot of teachings to the Nagas, to other beings, composing so many texts that nowadays we can still study. So this is basically where we got to. Now, very important is that when you study philosophy, this is something that's mentioned a lot, especially when you study Parchin, pretty much at the beginning. So those of you who studied Parchin, especially at the beginning, you came across the fact that Nāgārjuna is referred to as the pioneer or trailblazer of the universal vehicle, since he reintroduced the teachings of this vehicle and provided the reasoning for why the Buddha taught it. So very much Nāgārjuna is already at that time, there were people who said, no, Buddha never taught this, which in a certain way, it's not as important as in other religions. Like, for instance, Christianity was taught by Jesus. If it wasn't taught by Jesus, I don't know how reliable people would have thought it was. In fact, actually, with the Mahayana teachings, well, they work. I mean, they're really effective. So I don't think for everyone it would be necessary that to know that the Buddha had taught this. But I think in general, to preserve the Buddhist teachings is important to understand that they actually originated with the Buddha. Anyway, so he's called a trailblazer of the universal vehicle. He's also considered, or the pioneer of the universal vehicle. He's also considered the pioneer of the explicit subject matter of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras, which is emptiness, and the pioneer of Madhyamika philosophy. This is all slightly different, and we discussed this. We particularly talked about the pioneer of Madhyamika philosophy. Okay, so bear with me. Why he's called this, although it's all connected, but being this pioneer is considered really important and understanding it. And he's not the only pioneer, but he's the pioneer of the universal vehicle, of the subject matter of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutra. So he's the only one, and the pioneer of Madhyamika philosophy. All right, so this is all a little new, some of this terminology here, but not difficult. The first one I think is pretty clear. It's pioneer or trailblazer of the universal vehicle because he reintroduced the teachings of this vehicle. Okay, and provided, of course, reasoning for why the Buddha taught it. But these latter two have to be explained. So although the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras are not more precious than other teachings of the Buddha, no one is saying they're more precious. That would be absurd. Any teaching the Buddha gave was precious because it came out of this boundless love and compassion and this unique wisdom the Buddha had. So, and it was always according to what the audience at this point needed. This is so unique about the Buddha. And this is what we're striving for, to be able to do ourselves, because of course we cannot remove the suffering of sentient beings, and definitely not the causes of the suffering of sentient beings. All we can do is guide them in the way that is most appropriate to them, according to their predispositions, their need, their interests. So if we know exactly, if we have attained the omniscience state of a Buddha, we know exactly what's best for any type of being. We know what they need, what their interest is, and so forth. So likewise, the Buddha taught exactly according to whoever he met. He was able to teach in the most effective way according to their needs, etc. So therefore, all of his teachings are equally precious, but the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras I consider to be extremely important because they have two main subject matters. Implicitly, they teach what are called the grounds and path, which is just another way of saying the different levels of mental transformation that practitioners of the universal vehicle must undergo in order to realize their full potential and attain the awakened state of a Buddha. So exactly what kind of mind do you need to generate? I mean, I guess we all want to transform our mind, want to get rid of our afflictions, replace them with more gratitude, feeling inspired, and more importantly, love, compassion, patience, and so forth. But it's just so hard to do. So without a kind of a map, a kind of a sense of where we're going, it's very difficult to not feel doubtful at all times. Am I doing the right thing? And also without the danger of actually going in the wrong directions. That's why the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras are so amazing in that implicitly they show this map. They show you exactly where you need to be going, where you need to go, what you need to meditate on, what comes next. And even though what they show are these very advanced mental transformations, so the grounds and path basically are the different levels of mental transformation that a bodhisattva undergoes before he or she attains their fullest potential in the form of, or realizes their fullest potential in the form of attaining the state of a Buddha. But once we understand what a bodhisattva can do, we pretty much know where we're going, and we can feel much safer in terms of, is this correct or not correct? We have this measuring pole based on which we can determine whether we're on the right level, on the right path or not. Okay, so that's what they implicitly teach, and explicitly. So implicitly means it's not obvious from the words. Literally, it's not obvious. But when the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are explained, then the implicit meaning is set forth, and it becomes clear that even the Heart Sutra teaches the grounds and path of a bodhisattva on the way to enlightenment. Explicitly, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras teach all the numerous different reasonings that establish the ultimate nature of phenomena or emptiness, which not only bodhisattvas need to realize to attain the state of a Buddha, but also practitioners of the fundamental vehicle need to realize to attain self-liberation. So whatever your goal is, either just overcoming samsara or even full enlightenment, we need emptiness. Without emptiness, no way we can actually remove our afflictions, or even more so, the imprints left by our afflictions, to become not just liberated but enlightened. Therefore, since the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras teach these two extremely important subject matters, they're considered to be one of the most outstanding of the Buddha's teachings. All right, so getting a bit of a sense there. These two incredibly important subject matters, so not just one subject matter, but two extremely important ones. And not just in a short version. I mean, the shortest version of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is just the Yige, is just the Yige A. Yige is Tibetan. Just the letter A, which just negates. So to some people who were ready, whose minds were ready, just hearing the letter A and their minds open to emptiness, they understood emptiness. But of course, there are longer versions, such as the Heart Sutra, and that's one of the shorter versions, but then much longer ones, 8,000 verses, 25,000 verses, 100,000 verses. So depending on who we are, more extensive explanation is just helpful. So more extensive was given. If we are ready to receive a very short teaching, well, then there's a very short teaching. Anyway, so having understood these two aspects, the explicit and the implicit meaning.
Yeshima, sorry.
Yeah?
Do you want to do meditation in the end, or you want to keep on the text?
I don't know what to meditate on. I can just meditate on Nāgārjuna,
Okay.
basically, right?
Because it's 7 half past.
I know I've got only 14 minutes left, but I
Do
basically
you
wanted
want to continue the text?
Yeah, if that's okay with everyone, we'll have meditation the moment we start the text, but I want to finish this part here, and I may not even read everything, the texts and so forth, I will not go into, but just say a little bit more, give a little bit more explanation, and leave the meditation today. So we'll definitely do 15 minutes at the end of class next time. So anyway, based on these two subject matters, one being profound, that's emptiness, and one being extensive, that's the different practices we need to engage in. So profound means emptiness, that's what we need to realize. Extensive means all the different other meditations. So when we say path and grounds and path, we're saying these different mental transformations that only happen on the basis of these different meditations we do. Okay, so based on that, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, so based on these two subject matters, two experiential, so two practice lineages developed, which were initially transmitted separately. The lineage of the profound view and the lineage of the extensive conduct. So the Buddha basically, based on these Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, created these lineages of experiential kind of teachings based on the profound view on just emptiness and the lineage of the extensive conduct. Now, the Buddha had so many great bodhisattva disciples, of whom the principal bodhisattvas were called the 8 great close sons. So they're always mentioned, the Neve Sejin Ge. So again and again in Tibetan, they're mentioned. So these great 8 bodhisattvas, some of whom we know by name, Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, Vajrapani. These are not the Buddha figures, the meditational deities, but there were actual bodhisattvas called Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, Vajrapani, Maitreya. You're familiar with Samantabhadra. So these were all bodhisattvas at the time of the Buddha. But Buddha Shakyamuni entrusted the lineage of the view to only 2 of them: the profound view, that is emptiness, to the bodhisattva Manjushri, and the lineage of the extensive conduct to Maitreya, both of whom were celestial beings. They were, again, not humans, but they existed in these special Buddha realms or pure realms, which is also important, this fact. So 400 years later, Bodhisattva Manjushri transmitted the lineage of the profound view to Nāgārjuna. So he didn't have a short life. That's why celestial beings, so they lived for a really long time. Or Manjushri, as living in this pure realm, preserved this experiential lineage until the time was ready for people on this, in our existence, in our human realm, to receive them. So he transmitted then, when the time was ready, to Nāgārjuna. And only 900 years later, to Bodhisattva Maitreya, he transmitted the lineage of the extensive conduct to Asanga. That doesn't mean people didn't practice this. Of course it was practiced, but it didn't become as widely known as it's nowadays. I mean, the entire teachings as they went to Tibet, that was only possible after they became more widely known. So 400 years after the passing away, the profound view, this experiential lineage, was passed on to Nāgārjuna, and 900 years to Bodhisattva Maitreya. So this is why we say Nāgārjuna is known as the pioneer of the explicit subject matter of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which is emptiness, because he was passed on this lineage of the profound view. So the lineage of the profound view, or in other words, the explicit, which describes, or which is the main topic of which is the explicit subject matter of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, emptiness. So therefore, he is the pioneer of that emptiness, of that explicit subject matter. And Asanga is known as the pioneer of the hidden subject matter of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which is the stages of the path. They are the hidden subject matter. Why? Because these 2 were the first humans after the Buddha to receive the 2 lineages and pass them on to other masters of the human realm, so that the 2 experiential lineages still exist to this day. So all this explanation very much focuses on what happens to us as humans and what happens elsewhere. What happens elsewhere is of no concern to us unless we can communicate, we can see these beings. But there's a lot of emphasis, of course, on pure realms, of pure states of existence, where you can only be reborn in if your mind is pure enough. So there are pure realms such as by Manjushri, by Avalokiteshvara, and so forth. Now, in the West, we have a really hard time to accept this, because we have we can't see them, in other words. To a certain degree, I think in the West nowadays, we're very much charvakas. We have turned into charvakas, hedonists, like the philosophical school of hedonists that believes in material satisfaction, material enjoyment. And unless you can see it, or nowadays prove it with scientific measures, where scientists, of course, are also quite limited, just being ordinary humans, using gadgets, of course. And so, of course, already we can know things such as, I don't know, radio waves and X-rays and all these rays that are actually not visible to us, but can still prove their existence. But that there are other realms of existence where beings are reborn in seems really difficult. But anyway, even without believing or not believing, it just explains why when we read the texts, Nāgārjuna is always described as this pioneer and that pioneer. So being the first humans after the Buddha to receive the 2 lineages and passing them on to other masters of the human realm, other humans, so that the lineages still exist to this day. That's why they're called these pioneers. All right. But the most important of these pioneers, and that's very much discussed in the text, in this text that we study in philosophy, the other two are mentioned but not discussed that much. But Nāgārjuna is the pioneer of Madhyamika philosophy. Although they're very similar, but the words are a little different. So the first pioneer of universal vehicle reintroduced universal vehicle. Secondly, with regard to the two lineages, but here more specifically Madhyamika philosophy, which of course also deals with emptiness, but nevertheless, so Madhyamika philosophy, because he was the first human being to clearly lay out Madhyamika philosophy by distinguishing, based on the Madhyamika assertions, which teachings of the Buddha are to be interpreted and which are definitive. So to take all of the Buddha's teachings and distinguish between what can be taken literally and what cannot, based on reasoning. So clearly lay out the Madhyamika philosophy based on reasoning. So which teachings of the Buddha can be taken literally and which not. So very important. So this is where philosophy really comes in. This is where, when we study now this following text, we learn exactly that. Which teachings, well, what can be taken literally and what not. And basically we understand, we learn about emptiness. That's just another way of saying we learn about emptiness. Another pioneer of the Chittamatra philosophy, which also disappeared from this world, is Asanga. Asanga is the pioneer of Chittamatra philosophy because it was the first human being to clearly lay out Chittamatra philosophy by distinguishing, based again on Chittamatra assertions, also taught by the Buddha, which teachings of the Buddha need to be interpreted and which are definitive. All right. Okay, that's it. That's how far I wanted to get. So I hope I didn't go too fast. I wanted to just quickly finish the introductory material to get into the text right away, not spend too much time on this. Give you a sense of who Nāgārjuna was. Why the Naga here and Naga there? Why pioneer? Why pioneer? So although the reason for being a pioneer, they're really closely related. Universal vehicle, the explicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, and Madhyamika philosophy, but the reasons are slightly different. Okay. And then, of course, you have all the texts, all the different texts. So you can read this on your own. Okay, I have a little bit of time left. So, well, he wrote extensively. He wrote collections of reasoning. So there's collections of reasoning. That's a whole collection of texts, a collection of praises, and a collection of advice. So we are mainly interested in the collection of reasoning because this is his work specifically on philosophy. And they consist of 5 or 6 texts, commonly referred to as the 5 or 6 collections of reasoning of the Middle Way. One, of course, the fundamental wisdom, so important, fundamental wisdom. So I'll give some description here. Maybe I add a little bit more. I don't need to read it here. Then there are some other texts that are less known. 70 verses, yeah, it's available in English. Then you have the 60 verses. Again, I gave a short description of them. Precious Garland is one of them. That's the one we're going to study. And that of these 6, the last one contains not just explanations on emptiness, but also on many other topics, so that we learn about method and wisdom together. And as I said, it's the basis for so many other texts that are studied nowadays in Buddhism, not least the Lamrim, for instance. So it's got 5 chapters and 500 verses, depending on the version we're following, but the version we follow has 5 chapters and 500 verses. According to the assertion that there are only 5 collections of reasoning of the Middle Way, the Precious Garland is included in Nāgārjuna's collections of advice. But this is not the view, for instance, Lama Tsongkhapa. That's why it's called the Precious Garland of the Middle Way. That's not the official title, but because it's considered to be a teaching on emptiness or on the Madhyamika, it is often called Umarinchintama, which means, in other words, the Precious Garland of the Middle Way. And then there's a whole list of the collections of praises, this one here, the first one, you all know probably if you followed His Holiness's teachings. His Holiness taught this a few times. The other ones you're probably less familiar with. Then there's the collections of advice. Again, this one you're familiar with, commentary on bodhicitta. His Holiness taught that several times. Some of you may know Letter to a Friend. The other ones are less known, I suppose, just because there's no Tibetan title I couldn't find anywhere. So 100 Wisdoms and Drops for Healing Beings probably haven't been translated into Tibetan. And here's another one that's maybe interesting. So this is called Compendium of Sutra, which is a text that cites many passages from the Mahayana Sutras and demonstrates that Nāgārjuna's explanation of emptiness is based on the Buddha's teaching. So he's basically saying, I didn't make it up. This comes from the Buddha's words himself. So anyway, that's the Compendium of Sutra. And all the other ones, some of Tantra, I don't need to mention. And Nāgārjuna's most famous disciple was, of course, Ayadeva, the author of the 400 verses and the author of several commentaries on the Guhya Samaja Tantra. Okay. Now, here, before we start, since in general Nāgārjuna's Precious Garland is considered to be part of the Madhyamika literature, it is also referred to as the Precious Garland of the Middle Way. All right, we're done. Sorry, that was a really speedy kind of introduction. Maybe it was overwhelming. I don't know. For those of you who have some background, it may not be too bad. You may have heard many of these things. For those of you who are completely new, well, don't worry about it. Some of the things will become clear, some of the things we mentioned. But all I wanted to was to generate the sense of the importance of Nāgārjuna, how he was not just an ordinary being. He was described to be the second Buddha. And in that way, studying his text may be more convincing, or you may get a better sense of what he's saying is according to his own experience, his own realizations, which is the same as that of the Buddha. So we're truly in good hands following his text. All right, that should suffice for today. And we start with this then. Oh, okay. Anyway, we start with this. Where is it, on what page? Let me just check what page it's on. It's on page 7. Yeah. So I'll continue with giving you some material. It won't always be that long. No way. And sometimes it'll just be graphics, just be charts, just notes and so forth. But it's difficult for you to take notes as I talk. So to have something already to look at and to follow may be helpful, of course, in your study of this text. Study, reflection, and meditation. Okay. All right. So let's leave it at that and just spend a few moments, dedicate the positive potential that we've accumulated by starting out, dedicating the session for the welfare of all sentient beings by generating bodhicitta, but also learning about Nāgārjuna, his achievements, and so forth. So let's take a moment to dedicate all the virtue we've accumulated towards being able to study, reflect, and meditate most effectively, so that we're able to eventually attain the state of a bodhisattva, to culminate in our achieving the state of awakening, to achieve the state of a Buddha, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay, so this should be enough for the dedications. Since there's not much time, I'm already over time. So let's do recite the prayer. Sorry. Okay, never mind. Okay, we'll do it next time. No, sorry. Usually I say a little bit more for the dedication, but I'm already a little late and I don't know what's planned afterwards. So anyway, that's enough, and see you again next Monday. Thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.